Good afternoon. I'm Thomas Shaw. Welcome to the latest in our series, Catechism of the Orthodox Faith according to the Old Testament. Today we're looking at the Wisdom of Solomon. Now, despite its title, this is an example of a pseudepigrapha, a book that has a description that isn't the actual author, and we don't know who the author of Wisdom of Solomon is. It does not appear to have had a Hebrew origin. It's written in Greek, and it's a single document written through with two parts. The first part discusses wisdom, and then the second part demonstrates how wisdom acted in the history of Israel. So it sort of repeats many of the themes of the Old Testament and the people in it. So we're going to look today closely at chapter 9, which is a prayer that closes out the first section and highlights a lot of its themes. Now, as I mentioned early on in the course, we would find at the end of the course that wisdom is the same as the Logos. The word and wisdom mean the same thing, and that these are both what we've termed the term we've used throughout this series of presentations is the word theophany. Theophany being the manifestation of God in our lives, the manifestation, the visible, the glory of God made visible in some way to us. Something that, as we've discussed, is only possible because we've gained this ability, this sight, through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. So it is the second person, second hypostasis, we would say, of God in the Old Testament, whereas when we come in the New Testament with the incarnation, it's wisdom that's being born, it's the Logos that's being born and becoming a man. So we're going to go through this prayer, and I'm going to point out some of the points that are being made. And the first point is the one I just made. So it starts off in verse 1. O God of our fathers and the Lord of mercy. We have the idea of mercy. Remember chesed, drawing in things from we've talked about over the weeks, and made all things by your word. Okay, so here we have the idea that comes into play in the Creed, for instance, where both the Father and the Son are identified as creator, that God makes things by his word, his Logos, and by his wisdom, because both mean the same thing. O God of our fathers and the Lord of mercy, who made all things by your word, and in your wisdom built a man, that by you he might be the master of what is created, and manage the world. So now we're getting into the purpose of the creation of humanity, that by you he might be the master of what is created, and pass judgment with uprightness of soul. So this is the management of the world and just judgment of the world is the function of humanity in the world. Then he goes on to say, give me the wisdom that sits by your throne. Now, this is an idea we see coming into play in the New Testament, where And we've talked about before where something is on the right hand of God, on the right hand of the throne of God. And this is the vision Stephen sees, the first martyr, as he sees Christ at the right hand of God. The right hand or throne means similar things here. They're stand-ins for the unseeable, unknowable Creator, the Father. Give me the wisdom that sits by your throne, and do not reject me from among your servants, because I am your servant and son of your maidservant, a weak man and lasting but a short time, and inferior in the understanding of judgment and law. So he's contrasting here the kind of wisdom that a human being can acquire through his own efforts in the course of a lifetime. Of course, all this is being put in the mouth of Solomon, who's considered the wisest man of his era. And so Solomon is saying here, a weak man, that he's a weak man, that life is short, and that humans are inferior in understanding judgment and the law. For though one is perfect among the sons of men, yet if your wisdom is absent from him, he will be regarded as nothing. This is very reminiscent also of Paul, where he talks about the gift of love, that if without love, no matter what other virtues you have, they're nothing. So the same idea here with wisdom. Each of these is a stand-in for the theophany, the idea of the theophany coming into our lives and guiding us forward. So wisdom is a gift of God. This is clear now. What is wisdom? Some people think, well, must mean craft, must mean skill, must mean the things that we know how to do by technology, science, and so forth. But he's contrasting that kind of wisdom and saying that kind of wisdom is short-lived, and because our lives are short, that it's not the wisdom that comes from God. It's not the wisdom that created the world. This wisdom is something else, and this is given as a gift. It must be requested, asked for. It's not something that is acquired by human effort, but by God's gift. He goes on to say, talking about the temple, you chose me to be king of your people and to be judge over your sons and daughters. You gave command to build a temple on your holy mountain. Remember, Solomon is the one who builds the temple. And an altar in the city of your habitation, a copy of your holy tabernacle, which you prepared from the beginning. Now, the idea of course, in the Greek, the word tabernacle is the same as the word tent. And so we have the idea here that the temple is a model of the heavens, of the tent that stretched out over us of the firmament. And it's a model of the whole world. And of course, in liturgical theology, when we participate in the temple, whether it be the first, second, or the temple of Christianity, we are participating in the things beyond the veil, beyond the firmament. That we are participating in the things of God, that there's a one-on-one correspondence. It's not an imitation, but it's a participation. So he brings in the temple. So this is, we're grounding whatever we're saying here about wisdom in a liturgical context. It's not free floating out there. It's not philosophy. It's grounded in the liturgy. And then beginning of 9, we start to learn a little bit more about wisdom, that wisdom was present at the creation. Of course, earlier he said that wisdom created humanity, but now he's bringing this point up again. With you is wisdom. With God is his wisdom. So this is the wisdom is God, but since we can apprehend it, and it's given to us as a gift, God, as we mentioned, has to tailor it to us, to our inadequacies as humans, which have been pointed out. So we could talk about wisdom and God as two different words, but wisdom is with God. With you is wisdom, who knows your works and was present when you made the world, and who understands what is pleasing in your sight and what is upright within your commandments. So when we receive wisdom, we know what God wants. So this is the idea of the new covenant that comes with the advent of Jesus Christ, that we don't need lists of rules and so forth, but in our own hearts, in our own conscience, we know what is pleasing to God and what is upright. In verse 10, we read that it must be sent from heaven to us, to emphasize the point we were making before. Send her forth. Now this her, the use of the feminine is because wisdom in Greek is the word Sophia. And so to refer to the wisdom is to use a feminine form. Now, we understand, of course, the Holy Fathers teach us that the holy wisdom of God is the second person of the Holy Trinity, Jesus Christ. But there were some Orthodox theologians early in the last century who developed a whole theology that didn't really take off and was condemned by Florovsky and other neo-patristic theologians. That's called sophiology, which takes this idea, and I won't get into the details of it, but it's a false path to try to consider Sophia, wisdom, separately from Christ. So, wisdom is Christ. Send her forth from your holy heavens, and send her from your glorious throne, that she might be present with me in labor, and I might know what is well-pleasing to you. So once again, we're repeating the same idea again, that wisdom is a gift. Wisdom, the theophany is a gift. We would say theophany is a revelation. Wisdom is a revelation. And in the prayer we're asking, or Solomon is asking for wisdom to be present and labor so we'll know what's well-pleasing to God. Once again, the idea of the heart, coming into the heart. So we know within our hearts what is right and what is wrong. We don't need outward laws and such things. For she knows and understands all things, and she will guide me wisely in my actions and guard me with her glory. So here we get to the point that wisdom has glory. And of course, glory there's another thing that emphasizes the idea that wisdom is God. Even though wisdom is other than God, because wisdom comes from heaven, God is in heaven. Wisdom comes down from heaven, and wisdom guides me. Wisdom shares in the glory of God. The glory, we've discussed this idea quite a bit, of glory. The unity of the Holy Trinity, the essence and energies of God. So wisdom guarding me with her glory is another way to talk about the participation of the believer in God's glory. In verse 12, we talk about our works. So when are our works acceptable to God? Now, in some Christianities and some versions of theology, our works are never acceptable to God. They're always filthy rags or worthless. It's a kind of a discouraging idea. It doesn't really motivate us to go out and do anything. But here it says, my work shall be acceptable when I have wisdom. When I have wisdom and I'm doing things according to wisdom. In other words, I'm operating within God's glory, participation in God's glory. I'm operating within the will of God. Now, does this mean I have no will, that I'm now an automaton, as seems to be the push me, pull me idea of many theologies? No, I'm still myself. I still have my personality. I still have my ability to formulate plans and operate accordingly. But if I have wisdom, I'm doing all of those things within God's will, not in a discrete, moment by moment directive will necessarily. Oh, that can happen if need be, but in general, I'm acting in accordance with God's will. And when I am, then those works are acceptable. Remember yesterday we were talking about the things that stand and don't stand in the ages of ages. That in the ages of ages, things that are done stand forever. And in this life, things that are done in this way, that become acceptable works. And acceptable works that are done with the indwelling of the Spirit in the pursuit of wisdom, those works that are done by participation in God's glory, those things stand. In the resurrection, those things stand. God forgets about the evil, but he remembers the good. And so we want to bring our works, our actions, then to do them according to wisdom. Then my works shall be acceptable. Then I will judge your people righteously, and shall be worthy of my father's throne. Which father? David. David is father. And then in 13 to 16, we get into the idea of thoughts, of logisme. Logisme is a technical term that's used in the Fathers. And we find it here in being used with the same sense in Wisdom of Solomon. And it means the use of our logic. But it can also mean our wandering thoughts. They're the thoughts that come in unbidden, and also the use of our own logic being considered as not part of God's will. That's what logisme means. Logisme are thoughts that come from the demons. And they cause wandering thoughts. They cause us to lose heart. They cause us to commit sins. They cause us to do all sorts of things because we give in to them and we're not living according to wisdom. So in 13 to 16, he talks about this. For what man will know the counsel of God? Or who will think about what the Lord wills? For the reasoning of mortals is cowardly. Is the logisme here. The logisme is cowardly, or the other possible translation of this word is wretched, worthless. The logisme of humans, apart from God's wisdom, which is a revelation to them, are worthless. This is what it says. There's no value. And our intents are unsafe, it says. The Greek here means the intention. Our intentions are the things we intend to do may not come to pass, right? What we want, our desires, our thoughts, They're worthless, they're baseless, they will have no positive outcome. This is the point he's driving at here. The English, these are words with a lot of meaning, and when you translate them word for word, sometimes some of the juice comes out of them. For a corruptible body weighs down the soul, and this earthly tent burdens a heart full of thoughts. See? So it's making the point that that our passions, which arise, our bodily passions, which are disordered because of the fall, that rise within our bodies, of course, then they produce corresponding worthless thoughts, and so the source of our logis me are in our body, in our earthly tent. So for a corruptible body weighs down the soul, and this earthly tent burdens a heart full of thoughts. So, and why is this? Well, as we mentioned yesterday, most of our life is spent pushing against entropy, pushing against, our imminent death. If we don't, if we just sit down in the dust and do nothing, we'll die eventually. And eventually our passions, in this case hunger and thirst, will probably drive us to get up and do something. So even if we're in ultimate despair, we'll do the minimum required generally, unless, we're suicidal, but that's a whole nother, that's the end result, the end madness of being controlled by bodily passion, because it's depressing. It weighs down the soul, right? Corruptible body depresses the soul, is what it's saying. That the passions that arise from our body fill our minds with thoughts and fill our emotions with depression. This is the opposite of wisdom. No matter how much those thoughts may seem to be super smart and super wise and so forth, they're just going to depress us because they don't have God's glory in them. They don't have true life in them. They're borrowed glory and borrowed life. It's 13 to 16. The logis me without wisdom are worthless. Our thoughts, our intents, our desires are all absolutely worthless without wisdom. And so this text then is really putting a revelation, the revelation of Christ in the holy mysteries, the revelation of Christ through the Spirit in the holy mysteries at the center of any kind of positive actions that will stand in the resurrection, actions which are acceptable to God. Otherwise, it's all vanity, it's all pointless, it's all worthless. This is the point he's making. We can barely form a conjecture of the things upon the earth. He's talking about how inadequate our abilities as thinkers are. And the things at hand we find with toil. It takes a lot of work to even see the things close by and understand them. But who has searched out the things in the heavens? In other words, the heavens being not the sky, and it's not saying, well, who have been the astronomers? He's talking about that area we've talked about beyond the sky, above the firmament, where God's throne is, where his court is, where his temple is, where his garden is. These images of a bronze or Iron Age a palace temple complex, right? This is what's envisioned as being above the heavens. This is all poetry. There's nothing literal here. But saying outside of this world, who knows the things that are beyond this world? Who knows the things of eternity? We just know the fleeting moment that goes by. And we have no basis in solidity without wisdom. And then finally in verse 17, we have a Trinitarian formula. in the way we've been discussing it. And it comes up in the three terms: counsel, wisdom, and spirit. Who has known your counsel? Well, nobody knows God's counsel. He's off there above the firmament. Unless you have given him wisdom, unless wisdom is descended, right? Because earlier we saw wisdom sitting up there by God on his throne. But now it's descended down to us and come into our very bodies, our very cells. And of course, there's the mystery of Holy Communion here, but it's not about the physical act of eating. It's about the reception into ourselves of God's wisdom and letting that revelation control how we think about things and how we regard things. So who has known your counsel unless you have given him wisdom, unless you have received Christ, right? Unless you've received the mysteries? Who knows anything about God? There's no knowledge of God or things of God that is not had within the Holy Trinity, within the mysteries. You know, philosophers may be off there talking about God, and there may be metaphysicians over here and people in other religions over there. But what this is saying is, you know, unless you have the God of Solomon sending you wisdom into your heart, then you know nothing of God's counsel. You know nothing of his will, of his intent, of his plans, of where you fit in. Who has known your counsel unless you have given him wisdom and sent him your Holy Spirit from on high? All right, so the Spirit, we have the three terms here: counsel for Father, wisdom for Son, Spirit for Spirit. And we find when you get to reading the Old Testament, you understand the schematic we set up at the very beginning and have brought up several times since, then you can start to see, well, this is how it works. This is how the Holy Trinity works in the Old Testament before the advent of Christ. Since the advent of Christ, of course, now we have a human figure for wisdom and a human figure for the Logos. And so we can fail to discern, as many do, right? Most people say, oh, the Trinity, there's no Trinity in the Old Testament. And here we have in the Wisdom of Solomon, book written probably less than half a century before Jesus started to teach. Very, very late. First century BC is the best guess scholars give. This is a very late book in the Second Temple. And here we have the same concepts that are going to be developed by the fathers that we find throughout the New Testament. It's how to understand the scriptures. So we have the Trinity here. And finally, salvation comes by wisdom in verse 18. Salvation comes by Christ, because Christ in the New Testament is going to be the incarnation of wisdom. And thus, on verse 18, thus the paths of those on earth were made straight, and mankind was taught what pleases you, and so they were saved by wisdom. So then at this point, he goes on to describe the history of Israel. So that's today on the Wisdom of Solomon, a very important book. We'll look at it a little bit more tomorrow. This was the initial overview of how the idea of wisdom is handled in the Wisdom of Solomon and how it ties in with all of the themes that we've been discussing so far. So I hope your this week before Holy Week is going well for you as we near the end of Great Lent. Of course, the end of Great Lent, the beginning of Holy Week is, if you're following the fast, doesn't seem like there's much break there, but it is a definite difference. We go from Lent this week Saturday of Lazarus, Palm Sunday, and then in the Holy Week. So I hope you're getting ready, and that these presentations have been of some help to you. We'll see you tomorrow.